I'm pushing the button and
I got you. We're recording now.
yeah, this way we have a primary as well as secondary audience as well.
Is that who's here? Is that who's here? Right? Is that Nancy, Jeff?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's Hey, hey.
Oh,
Yeah.
hey,
Hi,
Nancy.
how we doing, everybody?
Yeah.
Nancy's here, and I got my mother's also over here too.
Oh, nice to see you. Hey, how are you?
One computer, but a few additional people as well.
Good, good. Yeah, Jeff gets all the spotlight. We got to get Nancy in the mix. You know, there we go.
Oh, thank you.
Listen, she's helped bring in some key people that affect her. Her father made the news, by the way, on that as a donor. Yeah,
I saw that. I saw.
Yeah.
They were. I mean, Jeff. I stopped reading the Times Union after those last few articles, but I read that one briefly, and it was like, you know, they gave you a shout out and Nancy's dad. I mean, I went right back and be like, yep, we got some great people donating.
Yeah. All right, so let's get started. So on June 23rd, of course, is primary day. A lot of people get excited for the general election, but if you never win the primary, you're not going to get to the general election. Often people of the same party that are running against each other in a primary have very different positions. And so the primaries, I think, are just as important as a general election. And certainly in some jurisdictions, the primary is arguably more important than the general because the opposing side may not necessarily be putting up an opposition candidate. And so, in effect, a primary becomes a general election in such scenarios. So here tonight, we have the event, Be an Educated Voter. And I'm going to be interviewing Matt Toporowski here tonight. I'm going to give background on different issues, and we're going to ask Matt his opinion. And I think that is important that voters know what a candidate's positions are in deciding whether they're going to pull the lever for them or not. Certainly, we encourage everybody to vote no matter which way you are voting. With that, I want Matt just make a quick statement, just a little bit about in terms of your bio. In just a minute. In terms of my background, if you tuned in, you probably already know my background. I'll give it to you in brief. So I was exonerated after 16 years, incarcerated through DNA evidence. I've been home for 14 years. My life's calling is to do wrongful conviction work. Graduated law school this past, not May that went by, the May before that, I passed the bar. I'll soon be an attorney. I have a master's degree from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. My thesis was written on wrongful conviction causes and reform, and I have a large body of work consisting of regularly meeting with elected officials. I've taught a wrongful conviction college course several times. I've spoken across the country, some internationally. I was a columnist for 5 years. I've been published in 9 different publications, and I have been fortunate to lecture in front of some police departments and appellate judges, and I've done a lot of other things in between. I won't enumerate everything, but that's just basically my background. So Matt, maybe you just share your background just a little bit.
Okay, okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Jeff, for holding the forum. I really appreciate
Can you speak up just a little, Kat? Can we get the sound up just a little bit?
Sure.
I don't think it doesn't come really from my computer. It comes from from his.
I'll just talk louder. How's that? A little bit loud.
That's a little bit better.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jeff, for hosting the forum, and everybody for being here. I really appreciate it, and certainly talking about the important issues at stake in this race. As Jeff mentioned, this particular race has really become a bellwether for the progressive criminal justice movement across the country. That's how it's been written about in Politico and Wall Street Journal and other big publications. And, I launched this campaign back in February. I launched it running to end the 2 systems of injustice that we've had in this country for far too long. I was a prosecutor in this office here in Albany. I saw a lot of issues with it, namely an over-prosecute and over-punish approach. I actually worked in a smaller office first after I clerked up here for the 3rd Department. And I worked with some Bronx prosecutors, and they taught me that take serious crime seriously, and petty offenses, misdemeanors, we move those cases. So when I got to Albany, I approached the job that way. I resolved cases of mental health, substance abuse with treatment, and or petty offenses. I resolved them quickly, and I tried cases that needed to be tried. But this DA's office here really butted heads with how they wanted to recommend probation or punishment as a form of almost a policy on a lot of cases, and that led to disagreements with this office. Whether they told me to leave or I left, it doesn't make a difference. I disagreed with how they handled the office, and I left. And so then, as a defense attorney here in Albany, I had many clients here that I just went against this office, and I just saw the same approach, seeking convictions, not the truth, particularly with some young black men, some young clients I've had, where they really just got the book thrown at them, and did my best to get them fair results. But it was a moment where this DA's office was knocking black jurors off a jury, and successfully. And I walked back to my client, and he was just slumped over, all hope drained from his face. And it was a moment that it was like I was in this moment of everything happening right in my face, the systemic, the outright racism in the justice system. And ultimately, he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in a case that the evidence against him was very, very weak, and something he didn't do by suburban all-white jury. And so after that, I had it, and I decided to run way back in December. And very proud of the campaign we've run, certainly with help from justice advocates and people like Jeff have been extremely helpful, and some other people on this call, certainly Steve Downs. And now we got to a point where we've outraised the opponent by quite a bit of money, and we have some national endorsements, some local endorsements, and really a lot of momentum. And so I'm very hopeful that this race will turn out the way we all want it to, I think, and that we can bring reform back to the state's capital, and that we have a DA that will walk the halls with people that have been affected by the justice system, with justice reform advocates like Jeff. I'm certainly committed to it. I think we need a partner up here, not someone who is opposing important progressive criminal justice reform, which my opponent has. And so I'm committed to pushing forward for reform as Albany's next DA.
Okay. All right. So the format for tonight is I'm going to raise issues. I'm going to briefly explain them. I'm not going to take a position. I'm just going to ask to discuss different both wrongful conviction as well as criminal justice reform topics. I'll just give just enough background, concise, that everyone can follow. And Matt, you will state what your position is on the issue, how you see it, how you will address it if elected, if you'll address it at all. So the first issue what I'll discuss is this will be divided into wrongful conviction. There's a bunch of topics I'm going to hit there. And then there's other broader criminal justice reform topics. By way of context, nationally, per the National Registry of Exoneration, there have been 2,631 exonerations. And of those, 273 of those wrongful convictions have been of New Yorkers. So a wrongful conviction is defined as when an innocent person has been convicted of a crime that they're 100% innocent of. So the first issue that I'll mention is a conviction review unit. So briefly, a conviction review unit is a unit within the district attorney's office itself that can investigate allegations of wrongful conviction. It can do so when the defense brings a case and evidence to it, and it can also do so on its own hook without any evidence. It can do the entire investigation itself based upon any reason that it decides to do so. In Dallas, by way of a quick history, Dallas had more than 40 exonerations through its conviction review unit, through then Dallas DA Craig Watkins. Brooklyn's unit with Ken Thompson had 23 exonerations in 2.5 years, and Philadelphia DA Larry Krasner, his office is up to 16 or 17 exonerations in the 16, 17 months of his administration. Matt, what is your position on conviction integrity? And what will you do, if anything, if elected?
Yeah, so the conviction integrity and transparency unit is really a cornerstone of my platform. It's one of the first things I came up with as part of my platform and policy because, as Jeff mentioned, in New York State alone, we've had 300 wrongful convictions, innocent people behind bars for decades. It's completely unacceptable. And so the New York State Bar recommends that every office have one in New York. Every DA's office have one. So we have a DA's office currently does not have one, and we probably have people sitting in jail here in prison innocent. So this is one of the huge things that I want to shift the culture in the DA's office away from just seeking convictions to seeking truth. And so we will have a conviction integrity unit in this office. It will be an active one. It will have all the best practices of the office down in Philadelphia that Jeff mentioned, and the Dallas office as well. It'll be independent from the rest of the office. It'll be headed by either a veteran criminal defense attorney, or we'll find someone to head the office that has real experience with wrongful conviction work. There's also a piece to it where I want to make sure that unit is also training the other assistants to make sure that they are turning over evidence that they should, identifying evidence of innocence and turning it over. And so you're training the other assistants in the office not to cut corners, to seek truth, and then you're also preventing wrongful convictions that way. Of course, the last piece of it is the police misconduct database, which they have in other jurisdictions, New York City, Chicago, San Francisco, so that we're keeping tabs on police if they're testing lying, like Jeff mentioned, falsifying police paperwork. So we're keeping tabs on police because, again, if you're going to accuse someone of something that could potentially take their freedom away from them, we need to make sure that we have credible people make those accusations, and regardless, that we are disclosing and keeping tabs on credibility issues and making it publicly available. So I'm very excited about the conviction integrity and transparency unit here that we can build in Albany.
I'll just quickly mention, just for context, a real conviction review unit, just for informational purposes, has employees who are specifically assigned to that unit. They're not doing other jobs. They're doing that specifically. It's adequately staffed with both prosecutors and DA investigators, and it's measured by how it replies to credible claims of innocence, particularly those which have been high profile. So there are some sham units in existence, so just by way of context. Next topic pertains to access to DNA testing. So DNA testing is referred often as the gold standard of evidence. It's the most reliable form of evidence, assuming that the correct protocols have been followed and no contamination has occurred. In some jurisdictions, defendants have not been allowed to have DNA testing. They've had to litigate over that. And there's been other instances where once the testing excludes a defendant, the prosecution then changes theories in order to try to take into account the DNA evidence, change the theory that are articulated at trial to try to have the impact of canceling out that evidence. So my question from that is, will defendants be given access to DNA testing, and what will happen if the results exclude the defendant? Might we see some theory changing in order to try to save convictions?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jeff. And again, DNA has been one of the central new pieces of science that have exonerated so many people. And so again, I don't want to be getting this wrong. I think, again, you convict 100 people and 99 are guilty, 1 are innocent, no justice done. And so, again, we're bringing truth, transparency back to the system. And so I'm happy to make a DNA test available in these wrongful conviction cases. And certainly, this theory changing, Jeff, that you've mentioned, this trying to save face by the DA to make sure, we got to keep this person in. I'm pretty shocked by that. I'm shocked by that they fight back so hard if the DNA exonerates the individual. And certainly if that's the central piece of the case and it no longer holds, we're not going to be trying to put straws together to keep someone in there or to convict them. So I'm happy to work on that, Jeff. But you have my commitment that we're going to make DNA testing available to our potentially wrongful convictions, and also not trying to go around things, Jeff, to just hold people in, make cases out of nothing, or change theories. I don't think that's appropriate.
So next topic will be junk science. So a lot of evidence that has been allowed in courts previously, which seems to have like an air of being scientific. Things like footprints, tire tracks, bite marks, um, to name but a few. It's bullet lead analysis, where the theory is we were going to compare the chemical composition of bullets to where they were made, to then trace where they were sent to and determine who bought them. All these things which actually are not scientific. They're not scientific because there is no database, there is no comparison, there is no way of knowing just how many tires could have actually made the tire tracks. Hair evidence is another thing, part of junk science. And so this used to be allowed into the courtrooms. And so there have been convictions that have been obtained in the past with the assistance of junk science. So my question for you, Matt, is what about reversing convictions based upon that were procured with the help of junk science?
Yeah, I've definitely looked at some of these cases, Jeff, and examples where they are, relying on a shoe print or a tire track, or this bite mark is sort of the worst case scenario where you're convicting people on these bite marks, and those are some of the biggest sources of wrongful convictions. And so, I certainly don't plan to be relying on junk science, Jeff. Bite marks, footprints, or these hair samples. It's proven not to be accurate. We're not going to rely on it. What we want to do is rely on real evidence, and if that's testimony, it's corroborated, or if there's, digital evidence. We're living in this digital age now where a lot of things are actually, recorded everywhere you go and whatever you see. So I definitely want to make sure we're focusing on getting it right, and not just relying on, I would call it grasping straws here, if you're trying to pull in footprints and, bite marks, Jeff, I don't think we're using bite marks at all. I know that this has really been a bad area that has just led to a ton of, wrongful convictions. So we're not going to use junk science here. We're not going to lie on at the office.
Okay, so the next issue pertains to studying wrongful convictions. So by way of contrast, whenever there's like a train accident or there's a plane accident, the National Safety Transportation Board, they do an investigation, and they try to determine, what actually went wrong, what can be learned from it in order to prevent future crashes from happening in the same way. There's been a few DA offices that have studied wrongful convictions, once an exoneration has happened. I know in my particular case, the district attorney appointed 4 independent experts to analyze what went wrong in the case, and then they made that report publicly. So my question, Matt, is what will be your position when exonerations happen, whether Albany or even statewide or even nationally?
Yeah, I think this again is the best practice, Jeff. It's like anything. Even after a campaign, you come in, you do an autopsy. What worked, what didn't work. We do this at my law firm now. We have bigger cases, or we go to trial on bigger commercial cases. A lot of paperwork. What arguments work, a lot of motions, and we go back and we look what worked, what didn't, what was effective, and it's just the same process here used with wrongful convictions. And really, the purpose here is more important than what I was just describing, because what you're trying to do is prevent mistakes happening in the future. And this helps inform office policy, and so I certainly plan to put in office policy from best practices that I've seen in other offices that have effective conviction integrity units, but also just effective units and making sure we're disclosing Brady material, favorable material. And I think it informs office policy. It'll inform offices everywhere and really inform the criminal justice system. So, I'm all for that. I think that's a best practice and smart approach.
All right, so the next topic will pertain to Brady violations. So a Brady violation is when a prosecutor withholds evidence that is supposed to be turned over to the defense. It can be evidence of innocence. It can be evidence that pertains to credibility of a witness, or it might even just be something that is otherwise helpful to the defense. It might tie into actually punishment. So withholding exculpatory evidence, again referred to as Brady material, has been a very common form of prosecutorial misconduct, along with improper closing arguments. Um, so my question is, and prosecutorial misconduct has been a major cause of wrongful convictions, but too often nothing happens to prosecutors when they engage in misconduct. So my question is, what is your position, Matt, on in terms of Brady violations, and what if anything will happen to a prosecutor if they're caught withholding exculpatory material or otherwise engaging in misconduct?
Yeah, it's a major issue. You're right, Jeff, in terms of it exists. Prosecutors do it. We're in this adversarial system. They want to win, sometimes at all costs. And I'll tell you, I saw Brady violations in this DA's office when I worked there. I saw prosecutors, we'd have witnesses. They'd get a payment to be there to testify. And I saw that happening, and I said, well, you got to disclose that. It's Brady material. And then all of a sudden there was this debate about whether they were supposed to disclose that or not. I said, what are we talking about? It's a benefit to the witness. The jury's got to know about it. It's a credibility issue, Brady material. And so I know for a fact that we have issues with it in this DA's office. And so I'm going to remedy that immediately by putting in this conviction integrity unit that'll help shift my culture in the office, because this unit will also, what I wanted to do is audit cases on a quarterly basis, go back through cases, make sure there wasn't anything that should have been disclosed that wasn't. So we're always making sure that this is happening. And we're rewarding prosecutors. We're rewarding prosecutors for turning over evidence they should, creating that culture. And if they don't, that those are going to be people that we're going to have to let go from the office. And I'll tell you what, I'm concerned about this, Jeff, going in there, because I think there's going to be, I think these issues exist in this office, and we got to shift that culture. And we may lose some people over it, but again, I'm not there to put anyone behind bars that shouldn't be there, that is innocent. I can't make that mistake.
All right, so staying on wrongful conviction, but just switching to legislation. So legislation is obviously the purview of the legislature, and the governor's office, if he's going to sign something into law or not. But certainly the district attorney, particularly the Albany district attorney, but any district attorney is allowed to weigh in and give their opinion on potential legislation. So as I mentioned before, staying on prosecutorial misconduct. So with respect to the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct, which is an independent oversight board for prosecutors, that's independent, that has subpoena power, that can investigate complaints that are either given anonymously or on its own hook, that has the expertise. So district attorneys in general have opposed the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct. Their position is that prosecutorial misconduct happens very rarely. To the extent that it happens at all, the grievance committee is adequate. The Bar Association is also able to police, whereas very few prosecutors have been disciplined. The grievance committee is simply not set up for that. It doesn't have the expertise or even the subpoena power. What is your position, though, with respect to the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct? Will it actually have a chilling effect, like district attorneys and prosecutors have argued quite a bit, or is it instead the oversight board that we need?
Yeah, I mean, a chilling effect. I mean, again, I think everybody needs to have some oversight, and we have a Commission on Judicial Conduct. We have a community accountability board or civilian community review board for the police that we probably should give subpoena power and strengthen as well. And so you're right, Jeff. These are the most powerful actors in the criminal justice system, and with all this power, it goes unchecked. And that's a huge problem, because you can get abuses of power that way because no one's watching over their shoulders. And you're exactly right on this, the Attorney Grievance Committee. No one is going to report prosecutors for any misconduct. It just doesn't happen. Attorneys get grievances against them from clients if they have clients, and prosecutors don't have clients. And other lawyers are not going to tattletale on other lawyers. It just doesn't happen in the profession. So we need a commission like this to always make sure prosecutors are acting ethically, professionally, abiding by constitutional duties. I was shocked that my opponent is the named plaintiff suing to block it because the commission passed full bipartisan support in this legislature, and the New York State Bar Association recommended that we have one. So it's another best practice that many people are advocating for, that my opponent here has really been against and sued to block here. So I'm in favor of this commission, Jeff, and I'm hoping to, if I win, to help to get it in place. Look, no one, if you don't have anything to hide, what do you have to worry about? I mean, that's the real question here.
Coerced false confessions are the second leading cause of wrongful conviction, coming in at 25% of the DNA proven wrongful convictions. While adults have been known to give coerced false confessions, particularly vulnerable populations are people with youth and mental health issues. There was a law passed somewhere between 3 to 5 years ago mandating videotaping of interrogations from beginning to end. But the law had carve-outs. So specifically, they made exceptions to second-degree murder cases, sex offense cases, and drug cases. So in those cases, the police are not mandated to record interrogation. What is your position with respect to what position will you take on that legislative item? Get rid of exceptions to videotaping interrogation.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm always in favor of more transparency here. I think for too long the justice system has been set up to condense and keep power in the powerful actors' hands. And so this is a situation where you have detectives or you have police. They already have the power. They go into a room with a young person, particularly, or a vulnerable person, or just really any person, and they're trained. They're trained to intimidate. We've seen this in police encounters on the streets, but imagine it's a closed room. They're trained to intimidate, or they're trained to use psychological games. And what happens is you can get false confessions that way, or coerced confessions, violation of constitutional rights. And so I really don't understand why we wouldn't have cameras there. If anything, helps everybody involved, right? Because we know what would happen. We know it was truthful, and no one is accusing anybody of anything. Here's the video. And so I think we do need to have a videotape for all confessions. And I'm happy to help advocate for that legislation if elected.
Okay, so New York State does in fact have compensation, but the process is that an exoneree has to file a lawsuit in the Court of Claims. They also have the option of additionally filing a federal 1983 civil rights lawsuit once they've been exonerated. But that's a process. It's averaging close to 2.5 years now. And exonerees are released with nothing and receive nothing up until the point where they are in fact compensated. What is your position with respect to exoneree reintegrative assistance?
Let me unmute myself here. Oh, I'm unmuted. I think it's a nice topic, Jeff. That's something I haven't thought about. I like that. I've talked a lot in my campaign about reentry for people, formerly incarcerated people that were there and they had to serve their time. And so this is a topic that's similar to that, because we're talking about reentry, but for exonerees. So maybe the support structure there is a little more robust than it is for people reentering that were formerly incarcerated, but that were there lawfully. To give some more compensation to exonerees, because obviously they weren't supposed to be there at all. So that's an interesting topic that I'm happy to sort of develop and learn more about. I haven't thought of that much, Jeff.
Okay. So right now that there's an uneven playing field with respect to financial resources and manpower between the public defender's office and the district attorney's office. It's not uncommon for one public defender to represent 100 people at the same time. Certainly there's a uneven playing field with respect to experts. The prosecution has an almost unlimited budget, whereas defense lawyers often have to resort to asking a judge to appoint experts to review a case, and most of the time those are denied. The judges feel pressure to keep the cost of trials down on the county. What is your position with respect to evening out of those resources?
I think there should be even, Jeff. I mean, I think we're getting more even in Albany County, to an extent. We got a good county exec here, and they passed legislation here recently to make sure that if there were conflicts of interest, that the county could appoint lawyers that worked in the community to represent people that couldn't afford lawyers, 18B law. And I've done some of that work. So we have a county exec that I think realizes those issues, that people need, real experienced and available counsel when they're accused of crimes. And so I'm happy to work to expand that to make sure it is on a level playing field. I do think that you're right on that, Jeff. But I mean, even if the resources are the same, though, I think as we both know, the power really lies in the hands of the prosecutor, what to recommend in terms of a plea, a sentence, everything, what to charge. And so I'm also confident that if we bring a more fair and progressive approach here to the DA's office, we can solve a lot of these underlying issues just from the DA's office. But I do agree. Like, look, these are lawyers. They should be compensated, and there should be enough of them where they don't feel overburdened by the work. And their work's already harder because as a lawyer, Jeff, as you know, you're also a counselor. I mean, you're talking to people about all sorts of issues. And so you're not just in there for a minute talking about a legal case. I've done this. You're going to be in there for a half hour talking about the person's life, their family, how it affects those people. It's a whole thing. So you're right. If they have too many clients as it is, plus they're really doing counseling work too, we got to understand those issues and make sure they're not overburdened so they can do the job well and appropriately.
Okay, let's turn to other criminal justice reform topics. Let's talk about parole a little bit. So a lot of prisoners, if they've been convicted of a violent crime, when they go, the parole board is supposed to evaluate whether someone's been rehabilitated, and if they were released, would they remain at liberty without breaking the law? Yet, a lot of prisoners are simply denied parole based upon the nature of the crime, which is something that's never actually going to change. I mean, the nature of the crime was known before the first day was actually served in prison. So my question is, what is your position with respect to people, just as a legislative issue, the parole board denying parole based upon nature of the crime rather than just focusing in on the rehabilitation?
Well, that's an interesting question. When we're talking about parole, I like to zoom out on some of these issues. And so I think, as we know, when a person's on parole, it's also an area that can contribute to mass incarceration, because if they're not released early, or they are released and there's technical violations, you turn the person, you throw them back into prisons. And so I'm definitely focused here. We've talked during my campaign about a platform of having a proactive parole release unit where the prosecutors can weigh in on some of these parole decisions, send letters to the parole board and say, this person served their time, they've been there long enough. Certainly our elderly and our aging population there. And so this is another area that, Jeff, where they're just going to deny parole based on the nature of the crime versus sort of, the other statistics and facts about the person that you normally look at. I think we need to be thinking a little bit creatively at this point in criminal justice. And so I'm interested in this topic. I'm going to admit I don't know a ton about it, Jeff, but I'm interested in it because, I don't like labeling people. So this sounds like labeling to me. Person is convicted of this, you slap a label on them, you deny them parole off the bat. Let's think about more creatively about this, because we know everybody's capable of change. I mean, and you got to think that way if you're thinking about criminal justice, because otherwise, people serve time and then they're just done. No, it's not correct. We got to make sure that we are supporting people and not just labeling it. And that's what this sounds like to me. So I'm open to thinking about this more, Jeff, and being creative on this. I am.
So you mentioned technical violations. So that's another topic on parole. So a technical parole violation. So when I was incarcerated, I saw a lot of people return back to prison, and sometimes I'd ask them, well, what happened? What are you doing back? Did you committed another crime, or what happened? And they said, no. I was supposed to be home at 9 o'clock, and I actually got there at 9:10 or 9:05. Or, I failed to tell my parole officer that I changed addresses, and, now I'm back for another 2 years.
Yeah.
What is your, what is your thought on technical parole violations?
Well, I mean, thanks for sharing that story. I mean, I think that really drives home the point. Jeff is in there someone's out and they come back in on something like that, and then they're there for, extended period of time. I mean, it's crazy. So, technical violations, Jeff, technical probation, parole violations. I've seen this happen. These officers, what they do is they get these little technical violations, they put them in their back pocket, and then they wait, they hold them over the person's head, and they pop them. They pop them around a holiday. They pop them right before some type of celebration. Next thing you know, the person's back in serving time because they were late by 10, 15 minutes, or because they hung out with the wrong person. Again, we're labeling as, fraternizing, whatever the terminology is. And so I certainly don't plan to prosecute a lot of these technical violations, Jeff, because I know that they contribute to mass incarceration, which I'm committed to trying to turn back the tide here in Albany County.
Speaking of parole, with respect to the elderly, while I was in prison, I saw a lot of elderly people in prison. I saw people, walking hunched over. Other people were bedridden, while still others were simply being literally pushed around in wheelchairs, with often, having to get on the dialysis machine and other debilitating illnesses. And while other people, there's a such thing called like aging out of crime, where people just, they change their mindset, just from just getting, they're all too old to do crime anymore. So you have both of those, and really the medical care in prison really is bottom of the barrel anyway, and they're particularly not equipped to deal with, geriatrics. And a lot of people that have been incarcerated for a long time, yeah, they committed very serious violent crimes, but that might have been 10, 15, 20, 25, even 30 years ago, maybe even longer.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of talk about, and these are all, mothers and fathers and grandmas and grandpas, they are people too. So what's your position with respect to the elderly in prison?
Well, I mean, I think that the COVID pandemic here, Jeff, really highlighted this issue, as it highlighted many issues in our justice system. The fact that we have a lot of people there that are very old, that don't need to be there, that are medically at risk in a place where you don't have adequate medical treatment. And certainly during the worldwide pandemic, they were sitting ducks in life or death situations without serving life or death sentences. And so I think this highlighted it for us, and that you're right. We don't need to be wheeling people out of prisons and jails in wheelchairs. And that you're right. I mean, the difference between, 5 years and between, 15 and 20 or 10 and 15, that difference in time, it's shown statistically, doesn't really make a difference on the person. If they're rehabilitated, they're rehabilitated by 10, or, it doesn't need another 2 more years or whatever the case may be. And so I think we need to be looking at how we can, again, reducing mass incarceration, getting some of our elderly and our aging people out of our prisons and jails. And just last things, like I said, I always think of the story of Shawshank Redemption, where they just keep stamping, denied, to I can't think of the Morgan Freeman, and finally he's like, stamp whatever you want. I mean, I'm old. I wish I could go back and talk to that young kid every day of my life. And they finally let him go. You know what I mean? And so I think it's important to make sure that we are understanding that, again, people are capable of change. You need to keep them there for extended periods of time. Certainly once you hit an age, you're older, you're elderly. At that point, it's almost torture, Jeff. It's almost torture just having their extended period of time.
Yeah. So while I was in prison, I mean, I saw people there for non-violent offenses, and some people were actually there for far longer periods of time than people that had actually committed murder. So there is a lot of talk of alternatives to incarceration, particularly with respect to non-violent offenses. I think as a society we've come to look at incarceration as the answer for everything. What is your position with respect to alternatives to incarceration?
Well, overall, Jeff, I mean, I'm certainly for them, but I mean, I'm trying to go a step further here as being a progressive and proactive approach here to criminal justice. And so it's not just that it's alternatives to incarceration in terms of treatment courts and programs. It's saying certain offenses, like maybe we don't even use the justice system for them. We decline the case totally and we divert it out of the system. We divert it to a community-based approach, not the justice system. We're talking about substance abuse, mental health issues, better treated by public health professionals outside the justice system. not in the justice system by lawyers who aren't professionals with public health, and not within our jails necessarily, because we know that treatment in jails is certainly not as effective as it is outside of jails. And so we're talking about all terms of incarceration, Jeff. I'm in favor, of it, obviously, but I think we're trying to go a step further here. Trying to step further here. We are declining them to a community-based approach and shifting our budget from the DA's office and the county level. The DA can be very vocal on these issues, shifting the budget to this community-based approach, away from these huge law enforcement budgets, which are also becoming a highlight and issue during the social crisis that the killing of George Floyd has caused across the country here.
Talk about solitary confinement. So solitary confinement is a practice whereby people are, kept in the cell 23 hours a day out of 24. They have very little property. They're not able to go to commissary, so they're just totally dependent upon the state with respect to food. Often, the lights are on all the time. There's lots of noise. You can't view the sky, and whenever you leave the cell, you're in handcuffs. There have been studies that show that first of all, that define solitary confinement as torture, and it says that it also causes mental health issues, and it also exasperates pre-existing mental health issues. Some correction officers argue they need solitary confinement, as if all hell is going to break loose if solitary confinement is taken off of the table. What's your position on solitary confinement?
I think we need to be working to get rid of solitary confinement, Jeff. Either just make it illegal, don't make it available, whatever the case may be at the legislature, because you're exactly right. I mean, and Jeff, let's talk about real people here. I mean, I got some people supportive of my campaign. Their young son, prosecuted by this office here, got the book thrown at him. He had mental health issues. Clearly had mental health issues, diagnosed. They threw the book at him. He was sent to prison. Those mental health issues were exacerbated in prison, and in fact, were very much exacerbated in solitary confinement, Jeff. And ultimately, the young man took his own life in solitary confinement. And so, these are torture chambers, really, for people. Certainly, young people, 100%. I mean, that needs to be a clear rule. We're not putting young people in solitary confinement. But we're working to end solitary confinement as a policy across the board. Again, let's look at the stats and facts. It is shown to be very harmful to people and just going to exacerbate any problems that people have, make everybody less safe in jail, outside of jail. Once they leave, it's a trauma-causing force.
So a similar issue related to reentry pertains to college education. For prisoners. Nationally, we have a 68% recidivism rate, whereas Hudson Link, a nonprofit organization that brings college education to some facilities, they have a 2% recidivism rate. I want to say that the prisoner is educated and they're equipped to obtain gainful employment upon release. They're much more likely to be able to get that gainful employment and not return back to a life of crime, not returning back to old habits and stuff that they might have been used to, whether it was dealing drugs, robbing, burglary, making money through other illegal ways. Yet the state did away with college education back in 1995. The rhetoric around that was, well, why should prisoners get a free college education? Whereas the financial forms were the same for prisoners as well as people who were not prisoners. So nobody would have gone to college just by way of being in prison for free that wouldn't have been otherwise eligible to do that if they were free. My question is, what is your position with respect to college education for prisoners?
Jeff, I'm in favor of this. I mean, look, I think rehabilitation needs to start from the inside out. And so a reentry needs to start from the inside out. So we're not waiting till someone gets out to then say, here you go. You can start reforming your life now. I mean, again, it's a productive way, Jeff. It's very productive. It's a productive resource for people that are incarcerated to start getting back on track. So once they leave, they can hit the ground running. And again, it's proven to show. It's proven to show and successful. that it works, that it helps people, and that once they get out, they don't recidivize, commit crime again if they get an education while they're incarcerated. And they're doing this down at Bard College, Bard College Prison Institute, very effective down there. And so I'm in favor of it, Jeff. And again, I've formerly incarcerated people helping out with my campaign that have done some education while in prison, and then once they get out, continue that. And now these people are forces of nature in the community in terms of being justice reform advocates and beyond. Community leaders. They work for the city at this point. So we need. It's about reentry, reform, and starting that process from the inside out. And that's why we should be in support of these services and resources, education to our incarcerated people.
Okay, let's talk about ban the box. So ban the box is a reference, of course, to a box that a person would actually have to check off when they're applying for a job, just to disclosing criminal background. And a lot of people have been denied job opportunities who otherwise would have received them. Equally troubling and also part of ban the box issue is disturbing practice of some educational institutions on requiring students applying to their college to disclose whether or not they have a criminal history and have that factored into whether or not they're going to be admitted into the educational institution. The reform work around this would change the law to where only after a job offer was made within a background have to then be disclosed. I mean, there can't be a relationship between the current job and what someone was incarcerated for. So we're not going to hire a bank robber to be a bank teller. But other than that, where there's a rational relationship, that would be disclosed on the back end in order to prevent job discrimination. It's common for people on parole to struggle to get jobs because they can't get hired as soon as they mention their record. So, what's your position on ban the box?
Well, I was in favor of that legislation, Jeff. I mean, I really, again, this goes back to labeling people, and I think it's very much a labeling when you say, "Hey, have you been convicted of a misdemeanor?" Or just slap a label on them, or felony, slap a label, and they get the scarlet letter for life. And we know, statistically speaking, that these felony convictions are already one of the main drivers of homelessness and poverty in our country. And part of the reason behind that, Jeff, is because you get to a job interview and there's that box that says exactly what we're saying here, and they have to check it. And I think that is an unfair labeling. If someone comes back and they've served their time, they've served their time. See if they can get back on track. Get a new job, get a good job, and banning the box is one way to help ensure that. And so I'm certainly in favor of that legislation, Jeff.
So just next, just in terms of as an issue, there's not a bill pending that I'm aware of, but just as an issue, the Department of Corrections in New York, they're in the habit of housing prisoners who are from the city. They're housed in prisons that are in upstate New York, and prisoners who are from upstate New York are traditionally housed in the prisons closer to the city. And later on, after many years, you can try to earn a transfer back closer to home. Family ties, community ties are an indicator of somebody having an even better chance of transitioning back to a crime-free life and being able to re-enter successfully. Just as a concept, Department of Corrections, housing prisoners closer to home as something that's a benefit to society. What is your opinion, just on that topic, generically?
Generically, Jeff, I mean, I do agree with that. When I've talked to people, families of incarcerated people, it's a major issue. And people brought that up to me during the course of this campaign. And again, I think that it's something that we need to be aware of. If we have the resources for it, why aren't we doing it? Why are we shipping people up to, way up north if they're from here, and people way up north down here? I mean, imagine it's because you got to spread people around, but I think it's something we need to be cognizant of, because these people still have families, they still have loved ones, there's still things you can celebrate even when they're incarcerated, and they should have access to their family members to do so. And honestly, Jeff, it probably helps people, in terms of staying connected and continue to rehabilitate, and it probably makes people safer overall because people are still keeping those strong bonds with their loved ones. And so I'm in favor of that. I mean, it's a human approach, Jeff, that makes sense.
So there's a drug I believe is called Narcan, which is something that can reverse when somebody is overdosed. You can administer the drug and save lives. And other people have positions. Well, it's a waste of money, and people are some people are opposed opposed to that. They think it's somehow giving a blessing or the go ahead to engage in drug usage. So what are your thoughts on that, and what are your thoughts with respect to drug addiction as a public health problem rather than as a crime?
Well, I've definitely made clear during the campaign, Jeff, that we're not going to prosecute substance abuse, and so if someone is obviously addicted, that we need to be treating that with the public health professionals and not necessarily in the justice system. That's where you're diverting it out of the whole system completely into a community-based approach with a public health professional that can really get people treatment that they need. Again, we're just lawyers in a courtroom. We're not medical professionals, and so we're not the best equipped to treat these issues. So I do see it as a public health issue. In terms of the Narcan, Jeff, again, look, I'm aware of that. I worked in the Albany County Drug Court here, and I certainly support measures that help people that are more safe than the actual legal drug to help people get back on track. I mean, Narcan is one of them, and also make it available when needed. And it kind of brings up the topic of safe consumption sites, Jeff. It's something we've kicked around quite a bit up here, depending on whether the medical professionals here say, maybe we should have one of these safe consumption sites. And again, I think it just goes to people have substance abuse issues. You're treating them as public health issues, not within the justice system, not punishing people for those issues, because you're not going to really deter anything by doing that. They're still going to have these issues. And so it's thinking about it more, more openly, more creatively, more progressively, and measures like that I'm in favor of. And so I think, Narcan being available is one of these measures, Jeff.
All right. So as I wrap up, just two issues that I'll combine into one. Certainly, I think one of the really big things in the community is that there seems to be a valuation of law enforcement lives, and those should be valued for sure, but so should the lives of other citizens. And it seems that even that when police engage in unjustifiable deadly police force, and that even when that's caught on camera, there's a decline to prosecute. All of a sudden the prosecutors are totally inept. They can't quite seem to get an indictment. They can't quite seem to get a conviction, and it feels like, so a lot of the public feels like it's like the system covering up for the system. It's a two-tiered system of justice, and it's caused a lot of civil unrest, and rightfully so. Talk about unjustifiable deadly police force, and maybe its companion, police brutality. Again, when it's caught on tape. I mean, if I was ever caught taking a baseball bat, Matt, to somebody's head, if I don't have a pretty damn good reason why, someone was trying to do that to me and I'm defending myself, I'm going to jail. I'm going to prison for that. There's no question about it, and I should. But, the police seem to get away with beating up on the public, and that really undermines a lot of community confidence in law enforcement, in the police. And then that extends to the district attorney's office when they don't prosecute those types of cases. What is your position on those topics?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a relevant topic right now, obviously, because we've seen the killing of George Floyd, the name of law enforcement, name of safety. We've seen, again, with Ahmaud Arbery, with Breonna Taylor, and so the sort of list goes on. And the issue here, Jeff, is that this justice system has really enabled this, because it has insulated these bad police actors. And so these bad actors feel almost they can go out with impunity and do whatever they want, which has led to the tragic killings, really a lot of black people, really communities of color, over criminalization and the killing of these people in the name of law enforcement and safety. And so this is a major issue right now. It's a major issue. It's existed in Albany County. We have had deadly encounters between police and civilians. the DA's office here is acted just like you described, Jeff. They insulated the police. All of a sudden, it was, this person, doesn't get in trouble. Anybody else would. And so the policy there is you got to make it clear here. You make it clear that you're going to get a special prosecutor appointed, so you don't have any appearance of impropriety or bias between the DA's office and the police, which they work together pretty closely, so the public has more transparency and sees into this and has a more fair approach. And so you remove yourself from the situation. You get an independent special prosecutor to handle these cases. That's what they've demanded here in Albany. The community has demanded it. And I tend to listen to the community and get special prosecutors appointed immediately. If it's a case of a police officer just committing a crime, Jeff, outside of his role as a police officer, as a civilian, he's off duty, whatever case may be, we can prosecute those cases. We can prosecute those cases, and we will. We won't accept that type of, obviously, illegal activity by a person in law enforcement. But once a civilian and a police officer, we're going to remove the DA's office completely, appoint a special prosecutor to give the people what they want, which is what they're calling for right now.
All right, so those are the topics that I wanted to cover tonight. If anyone has any questions on any of the topics we've talked about, or even a different criminal justice topic, we are trying to keep this more more of an issue-based conversation rather than a political thing per se. So if anyone has any substantive questions on any of the topics or any other criminal justice topics, you can ask those now at this time.
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
I'd like to ask Matt, well, kind of a backup. I had very recent experience with the Community Police Review Board. And I happened to be on a meeting. They have public meetings now, on a Zoom meeting last night with a lot of people discussing the policies that have been set forth tentatively by the city of Albany, at least, to address some of the larger issues that you just finished talking about, with police brutality and interactions between police and civilians. It was very good, very interesting, and it's ongoing. There's no guarantee that the policies will be accepted, although it seems to be. My question, I guess, is what's your thought and what's your experience on the interaction between the DA's office and the police? Not just in terms of, what you just said, Matt, about appointing a special prosecutor. And I think the governor has since come in, and correct me if I'm wrong, to say that any case statewide of police brutality or police violence against a citizen will automatically be referred to the state attorney general. I'm not absolutely certain of that, but I believe Cuomo came out with that, a little while ago. But my question is, based on your own experience, what have you seen, and what is the interaction, and is it friendly? Is it adversarial? How can citizens look at this? Because it seems to me that there's the DA's office, and there's the police, and there's the citizens. So there's a tripartite interaction there, each with their own issues and agendas.
Well, I mean, I'd say how it currently exists is I think that the current DA's office really treats the office almost like a mini police station, because they got 10 investigators on staff, and these are really retired police officers that work the local police departments. And so there's a lot of buddy-buddy relationship. I mean, this is an office where, the detectives there are there so often getting all their overtime. They're some of the highest paid employees in the county with all this overtime to get going to talk to the prosecutors about cases. Every case they got to talk to the DA's office. And what happens is it turns into almost one big unit. It's not separate. These are the people they go out together. They're friends together. They have the whole thing, and that creates a real issue when you're talking about criminal justice and freedom and transparency, because the reality is the DA's office should be independent from the police department. We're removed from the street encounters. we're removed from whatever happens out there, and we get the case. We look at it objectively. We look at it with legal eyes, and we also look at it with knowing the issues in the criminal justice system, which we need to address now, systemic racism and other issues, and say, what's really going on here? What should we do with this case? And so you got to have an independent DA's office. Right now, I believe the DA's office is so entrenched with the local police department, you're not going to be able to get anywhere here, towards a more fair approach per se. Not to say you're still a partnership. I plan obviously to reach out to the departments, try and build that relationship, but we're independent here. We're not an arm of the police department or vice versa. And I'm gonna make that clear. And I'll obviously be pushing for proactive progressive reform from my office, hopefully lead the tip of the spear. Hopefully they'll follow behind me. We'll see what happens. With the civilians, the Civilian Accountability Police Review Board, we've talked about that and how to strengthen that. I mean, the DA's office, even though they can't pass legislation, can be vocal. And so the DA's office can say, you know what, these people should get subpoena power down here, and be vocal on things like that to strengthen those civilian review boards. I do think it's all about transferring power to the people, to always try and improve this justice system, and so I've made a commitment to that, not just giving people a seat at the table. People have been sitting too long. They know what they want. No one's done anything. So I plan to act swiftly to make these changes, and then always make sure I'm having ongoing, continuing, open, honest dialogues with the community to make sure they feel involved and they're involved in policymaking at my office. This community-based approach, it's a lot easier said than done, but I think we can shift out a lot of these investigators and hire community liaison people that boots on the ground, so to say, deep roots in the community, help me keep my ear to the grindstone, the ground, to always know what's going on, keep us more safe that way, ahead of issues, and empower the community. And I'm excited to do that.
All right, so we do have I do have a question in the chat box from I'm going to butcher the last name. I know it. Heather Walisiak. Hope I didn't butcher it too much. So Heather's question, she says, at the grand jury, it's just one side there. It's the prosecutor is there, and her question. I've never gotten this question before. So her question is, being as though the grand jury now it just has one side, it just has a prosecutor. Her question is, could it possibly consider changing it to where the defense is there too to present to the grand jury? So kind of an unusual question, but it's kind of more of an educational forum.
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the grand jury process is it's a constitutional process, and so changing that is, I can't change it. That's how it is by the U.S. Constitution. So, but it's a good question because it brings up this other point, and I've talked to some former grand jurors here in Albany County during the course of my campaign, and what they tell me is that sometimes they want to ask questions because the grand jurors can ask questions of the witnesses. They can be actively involved. But what happens is the DA's office, and as you know, they control the whole process. They're only guy or woman back there, and so they can say, "Oh, not relevant question," or they'll ask another. They can control it, and so I think the real answer here is that if you have a DA's office that is, again, not just focused on getting convictions, indictments, and whatnot, then you're allowing a more robust grand jury process. I mean, I've talked to so many former grand jurors up here that say some of them are really tired of just them coming in and getting these indictments, the same case over and over and over again, not being able to ask more critical questions. It's almost like they're potted plants in there. And that goes with the old saying, you can indict a ham sandwich. Well, that's the reality up here. So I think it's a great question. You can't change the process, but you certainly can make it a better process. And the person to do that is the district attorney.
Anyone, any other questions? All right, well, listen, want to thank everybody for tuning in, and, Matt, thanks a lot for stopping by, giving about an hour of your time here. I know it's a really hectic time for you right now. It's the run up. The election actually is on the 23rd. So thanks for taking some, time from doing other campaign activities. And I hope everybody, on the event tonight and who will watch it secondarily, I hope that we've educated people on just on issues, and you've had a chance to hear, Matt's position on these various issues. So I hope that it was an informative event, and that was the spirit I tried to conduct this in, rather than as a partisan thing. So with that, we'll end the event, and I do want to give a special thanks to the coalition group. It Can Happen to You, for allowing us to use their Zoom channel. I am part of that coalition, and Kat Dean in California is helping with the technical side of managing this the Zoom event. So I wanted to just recognize her and thank her for that. And thank you very much, everybody. And Matt, I'll see you on the campaign trail.
Sure, yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for setting up.
Oh,
Jeff.
my mother's announcing Happy Father's Day. Okay.
All the daddies.
So that can be conveyed. That can be conveyed by by the people on the call and relatives and stuff. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful Friday evening, and enjoy the weekend, and stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.